Hey, happy almost Halloween. I've been trying to read this fucking book for the last 2 years, and I can't do it. I'm close. I've got probably about 200 pages left, but I just can't get through it. It's coming from a writer myself, and I am nowhere near the level of Stephen King. This is not one of his best works. I'm more of a The Stand kind of guy. This book I'm not a big fan of. What I really do like is this book, Our Last Nights on Earth, written by, well, I'm sure you can, you know who that is. Available on Amazon.com for $14. Anyway, shameless plug. So, I guess I can talk briefly about the miniseries, and then we'll segue into the theatrical films. I want to thank my buddy Mitch, who was the one who kind of asked me to. He was curious about my thoughts about the It movies. Hopefully, he meant It and not like It Follows or any of the other movies that have the word It in the title. My history with It, I don't remember even when it came out originally. A lot of people, I think, forget that this was never, the original It was never in theaters. It wasn't a theatrical film. It was a TV miniseries or a made-for-TV film, and I believe it premiered in 2 parts, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't even read Stephen King as a kid. I tried to. I think one of the first books I tried to read was It, but when I was little, just a 1,000-page book just wouldn't hold me over at that point. The first time I actually sat and watched the original was on DVD probably maybe 10 years ago. It might have been even sooner. Just out of curiosity, because it seemed like there was a period of time where a lot of other online personalities were reviewing it. A lot of people tend to like Tim Curry's performance in there. I don't know. I didn't really, and it's been a while since I've seen it, but I didn't really enjoy it. You got to remember it was made for TV, and television, especially back in the 90s, was not what it was today. Today, television has pretty much surpassed film because you can use the same techniques you would use in film in TV, and television shows nowadays basically have film budgets. Game of Thrones. It seems like the consensus with this, and one of the reasons why it's not maybe his best work, I feel that Stephen King is best at doing stories about coming of age stories. Another one that I really enjoyed of his was Hearts in Atlantis, which is not really a horror story at all. It's just a coming of age tale about these teenagers, and he later revisits them as adults, kind of. And that's kind of what It does. With It seems like he was trying to do a coming of age story, but he wanted to blend horror in there too, so clown. I don't know, I think Pennywise is just kind of a weak villain, partially because he's such an abstract villain, and it's kind of weird. I never understood why he was portrayed primarily as a clown when pretty much anybody he attacks sees him as something else, depending on what your worst fear is. Clowns to me are not very scary. I personally think the clowns in Killer Clowns from Outer Space were more scary. Tim Curry, I believe, he had a very electric performance. I loved watching him in that film. I don't think he was scary. And because you're dealing with a television budget, when they did try to make him, more scary with the teeth and everything, it didn't really pan out. That on top of the fact that I really didn't like a lot of the actors in that. The child actors were okay. I don't remember much about them. But the adult actors, the only adult actor I remember, the guy from Three's Company, whose name escapes me right now. I'm sure it'll come to me. I know he played one of the adults. I didn't like the adult actors at all, and I think that's my biggest problem with the book. The book switches back and forth between the adults and the kids, whereas the theatrical films, you had primarily, the first film was about the kids, the second film, which is still in theaters, followed more of the adults. There's much less material covering the adults than there are kids, so in the second film they still had to switch back and forth, but primarily it was the adults in the second film. The book is much more, it switches back and forth, and the stuff with the adults is just not very interesting. And that's how I felt about the made for TV movie. The production quality, I think that kills it too, because again, you're dealing with a 1990s or late 1980s TV budget. Um, yeah, and of course, you have the ending. By the way, this is going to have spoilers. I'm just telling you right now, don't watch this video if you plan on seeing it chapter 2, because there'll probably be spoilers, and I'm going to talk about the endings of the various versions. Again, I haven't finished the book. I'm having a hard time. I really want to finish it this year. I started reading it before it chapter 1 came out, or shortly after it came out, maybe I started reading it, but that was 2 years ago, and I'm still reading this son of a bitch, because I've been writing my own books, primarily Our Last Nights on Earth, available on Amazon. So the TV film, I can understand its appeal. It's definitely something I would have enjoyed probably had I seen it in the 90s, because I watched Are You Afraid of the Dark and some of those Tales from the Crypt, which I thought were all kind of corny. But my bar started really high for a lot of those. So yeah, I don't know. It's, from what I've read of the book, it's a pretty good adaptation. It's very faithful. But there's also a lot of stuff they couldn't do because it was made for TV. And, you know, back then, in the 90s especially, it really wasn't until the last 20 years, you know, you didn't really have a lot of TV shows on HBO, Showtime, Cinemax, that kind of thing. So a lot of TV really, it just was a different landscape back then. So, you know, it couldn't be real violent. I mean, one of the most shocking parts in the theatrical version was actually seeing the little boy get his arm ripped off in the very beginning of the movie. I took my daughter to see these, by the way. Does that make me a bad dad? She wanted to go see them, so I took her. I didn't drag her. In my house, once you reach the age where you can ask to go see something and you really want to see it, I take you. I don't care. So anyway, that's really my thoughts on the TV version, the original version of it. The theatrical films, for some reason, in the last 5 years, we've seen quite a bit of Stephen King stuff being adapted. We've got Doctor Sleep coming out, which is the sequel to The Shining, with Ewan McGregor, which actually looks pretty good. We had The Dark Tower, which I haven't seen yet, come out a couple years ago. It and Pet Sematary, which I thought was pretty good. I've never read the book, but I know the gist of the storyline, and I did think that was pretty good. So It. First of all, I liked how they didn't cram everything into one film. I liked that they split it up. It's the only time I really ever felt that splitting up a book was necessary, because it is a very long book. You can't give me a good argument for why The Hobbit needed to be 3 frickin' movies. Genuinely, I liked it quite a bit when it came out. The best Stephen King adaptation, it's good. It's probably up there, top 5 maybe. I'm a big sucker for The Shawshank Redemption, which is one of my favorite films of all time. Again, not a horror movie, but a great, you know, I just think Stephen King is much better at those kinds of stories. But it's funny because he's most known for, he's best known for his horror stuff, so go figure. And I like some of his horror stuff. Carrie was pretty good, the movie. A lot of his horror stuff I haven't read. Carrie was pretty good. The Shining, I don't know. Was never a big fan of it. I understand why it's got its appeal again. I didn't think it was really scary, neither chapter 1 or chapter 2. It didn't really get under my skin like some really good horror movies do. The stuff that did get me is like the jump scares. I don't mind jump scares, but they get me when they come. That's all I can say. Nothing can prepare me for a good jump scare, and these movies have some pretty good jump scares. I love the cast in both films. I think they're pretty much flawless. I'm a sucker for the 80s, so I really did like that they set these starting in the book. The kids are in the 50s, and then the adults part of it takes place in the 80s. And this one, they started in the 80s, and it goes to current day in the film. And I like that. There's a lot of fun 80s references. I believe it actually takes place in 89, which was the year they reference, like, I think Lethal Weapon 2 came out that year, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Batman. So they're very specific with the year, and I just love, I know a lot of people, there are people out there that are kind of sick of this whole 80s nostalgia wave we've been having, but I'm a sucker for it. Stranger Things, I love stuff like that. So I like that part of it. I like the kids, I love all the actors, and I love how the Loser Club interacts with one another and the camaraderie between the kids. I like the Henry Bowers character. He's such a little asshole. You hate him so much, and the stuff he does is just ungodly, awful, terrible to some of these kids. Let's talk about Pennywise. I didn't really think that the original Pennywise that Tim Curry did was scary. And again, like I said, because of the budget, when they tried to make him scary with like the teeth and they made him do monstrous things, it didn't really pay off. Here, I liked, especially towards the end of both films, but well, I liked it in both films, when his mouth opens and you see the jaws and you see the three lights in his throat, and it's always been this very obscure thing. They never really come out and tell you exactly what it is. They give you ideas and things like that. Spoiler, in both versions, he's basically an alien mutant spider, I guess. But I liked how they did it much better in the theatrical version, It Too. I liked the setting. I liked, when I love the humor. I know some people don't, when they think of horror, they don't really like to laugh during a horror movie, or at least they don't like a lot of humor, like when it seems like a comedy. I felt that It Chapter 2 was like a comedy, really. It was barely scary, and I'll get into that later. It Chapter 1, I thought, had decent humor, but it balanced that with some good scares. I liked all the visuals when every kid saw Pennywise or It as a different creature, and how that played into things. It's been a little bit since I've seen Chapter 1, but I'm going off of memory here. I do remember my daughter, keep in mind, she was 7 when the first one came out, and she's 9 now. But she has older cousins that are a couple years older than her that got her interested in It. And so she went online and saw a video, and the video described the entire first scene of It, where Georgie goes off with the boat. And she described the whole thing to me, and she was like, "Can I go see it?" And I took her, and it was really cool because there were certain things that really freaked her out. She was grabbing onto my arm like a little date. It was so cool. But there were other things that she really responded to, like Pennywise doing his little, jig was pretty funny. And I thought Pennywise in this was legitimately scary, without thinking too much about it, because, how each character portrays it. Tim Curry, I think there has been an argument that's been made that Tim Curry's version played a clown that could trick a kid into going with him. Pennywise is just too creepy right from the get-go, but I like that. I think if you're going to do a clown, there's a lot of people that aren't afraid of clowns. I don't really think this movie needs a clown. I think if you just did a coming-of-age story about how these kids met up again after being adults and stuff, there's some deep stuff going on there, but it's kind of ruined by this funny idea. It's almost like Stephen King was trying to do almost like kind of like The Blob, where it's kind of a goofy, stupid idea, but I feel like Stephen King was trying to tap into that kind of a storyline. But it's all over the place. I have a really hard time getting into it, and some of the stuff that happens is messed up. Even in the movie, there's a scene where like Henry Bauer starts carving his initials into, I think it's Ben's stomach, and it's really creepy. And then later on, he kills his dad by stabbing him in the throat with a knife. It's kind of messed up, and I won't say in poor taste because it's a horror movie, for God's sakes. But some of these things that like Henry Bowers does, there's no reason for it, I guess. I'm not saying that every villain needs an elaborate backstory. We don't need a prequel telling us why Henry Bowers was evil. But I don't know. I just felt like he was doing those things. I know Pennywise was talking to him. I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass. I really liked the first movie quite a bit. And from what I've read of the book, it was a pretty faithful adaptation. I thought it was very funny. And I could relate to some of these kids because I had a hard time in high school. In middle school, especially junior high, so I can relate to being part of a group that wasn't very popular, and I like that they kind of owned it. That was the significance of them calling themselves the Losers Club. Now we're going to go on real quick to It Chapter 2, which I saw in theaters, I think opening day or the first week, and I haven't had a chance to go back to see it. My first impressions of it, I liked it. Not quite as much as the first film. I still thought it was pretty good. I thought that it was one of those things where the trailer kind of showed you all the really scary parts. It's one of those things where the trailer shows you a complete scene. It's the scene where Beverly is in the apartment talking to the old lady, which plays out exactly. It's funny because the day that I saw that trailer, I read that exact scene in the book. But they show that scene and they gradually show you that the old lady isn't who she claims to be, and then you see they start to reveal the monster in the trailer and they cut away, and then you're supposed to go see the movie to see what the monster really looks like, what the old lady looks like, and then they reveal it and it's funny, and that's how I felt throughout all of it. Chapter 2, a great way to sum up it. Chapter 2, it feels like a Sam Raimi film. If you like the Evil Dead movies, specifically Evil Dead 2, you'll like It Chapter 2. So, of course, if you've seen the trailers or if you know anything about the book, It Chapter 2 does what it promises. It takes place like 27 years after It Chapter 1, current day now, and we're following the kids as adults. They get called back to Derry, which is the town they grew up in, and they've all led their own separate lives. And over time, they've forgotten about their childhoods. They forgot about the Losers Club. They've forgotten about Pennywise, everything. Then Mike Hallen, who's the only guy who stayed in Derry, he gives them all a call saying he believes it has returned. So he summons all of his friends back to Derry, and as they come back, they start to slowly remember things. That's really interesting. Aside from that, honestly, it's pretty much the same movie as the first one. It's Pennywise doing pretty much the same thing as he did. I thought the jump scares were a little better in this one. There's a scene where that takes place in a House of Mirrors in a carnival setting that I really liked. There's a jump scare in there involving a little girl or a little boy that I really liked. The casting is perfect. I actually remember thinking like, who would be a good Beverly, because she's probably one of my favorite characters, and I love the actress who played her as a kid. And I said right from the beginning, Jessica Chastain. And of course, they got Jessica Chastain to play Beverly, and I thought she did a really good job, as I thought she would. All the other ones were great. I'm not very good with actors' names. The guy who played Bill, who was also in Split, I loved him in this. I thought he was really good. But my favorite performance was, I think his name is Bill Hader. Correct me if I'm wrong. The guy who plays Richie Tolzer. And I thought he was the highlight of the movie. You've probably already heard this before. He was just really funny. The best part about that movie. But all of them, the only one who I had a problem buying, because the whole story arc is he's fat when he's a kid, and now he's thin and kind of handsome and rugged. The guy who plays Ben. I didn't buy. I'm not saying his performance is bad or anything, but he didn't look anything. The other characters look like they spitting images of their children's self. What I really liked about this too is because this movie switches back and forth between when they were kids and when they were adults. They do these really kind of cool editing things that would be kind of simple to pull off because you're in a situation where you have the adult actors and the child actors on the set together. But they do these things where they might focus on an adult character, and she'll be turning a corner, and then the camera will pan over and you'll see all the kids, and then it'll pan over and the adult actress might not be there anymore. Just little editing things like that I really enjoyed. Sometimes I think once in a while the frame will be shared with both actors with the same character. Just little touches like that I really liked. Pennywise, as always, I really liked how he did that. This is almost a 3-hour movie. For a horror movie, I think that's a little much, especially one that was split into 2 films. It really, to me at least, did not seem like 3 hours. What seemed the longest was the third act, when they actually go to fight Pennywise for the last time. That's where the last hour is just that. And there's not a lot that really happens in that hour. There's not a ton of different things. It's just them fighting Pennywise in different forms, basically. It's an epic battle. I really did like what they did with Pennywise there. It's at least better than what we got in the made-for-TV version. Of course, you have to rely on a lot of CG and stuff. I didn't mind that for this because they shot it in a very good way and they made it believable. So I like that. I did like how Beverly ended up with Ben at the end, which I don't think originally happens in the book. I don't know for sure because I thought she ended up with Bill. The other thing, too, is in the book right now where I'm at, I thought that Beverly's husband and Bill's wife come to Derry to look for them because there's this whole tension of there's these little side scenes where like Beverly's husband is like, he's just beating the crap out of her and now he's like coming to get her. They don't do anything with that in the movie, and the stuff they do with the older Henry Bauer, it doesn't pay off at all. I hated that. I don't even know why he's in the movie because I know he's a big part in the book as an adult. He escapes and all that, and they do certain things like that. Like when he escapes, he's in the car and he escapes with his dead friend in the driver's seat, and I thought that was cool. But the payoff is really weak for that. I haven't read the book completely, so I don't know how it pays off in the book. It almost seems like with the second film, they felt like they had like, for example, Henry Bauer. He had no reason to be in this film. It just felt like the filmmakers put him in there because they had an obligation to people who'd read the book. This was an opportunity, I feel, where they could have maybe made the movie better than the book, and they chose to stay with some of the things they did in the book, but there's no payoff to it. So that part I didn't really like. Now, are these good Halloween movies? Even the TV movie, sure, they're horror movies. They're scary movies. You don't have to take place on Halloween to be a good Halloween movie. So yeah, I think they're all really good. It'd be nice if I could see It Chapter 2. It's not on video yet, for Halloween, but It Chapter 1 is a strong enough film on its own, and I don't know. Again, the biggest problem with the movie is that the source material is not the most compelling thing. But I think they did a lot with it to make it really good. I definitely think the films are better than the books. I don't think the films are like fantastic and great and not even very memorable, but they're very enjoyable films. I've seen the first one like 3 or 4 times now in the last couple of years. My daughter loves the crap out of this movie, and I think she liked the second one too. The second one, again, was very funny. Again, it's very much like watching a Sam Raimi film. If you like the monsters especially have that goofy Sam Raimi feel from like Evil Dead 2. It feels like they use a lot of like rubber costumes and stuff. I'm sure they used a lot of CG too. But those are my thoughts. I don't know if it's exactly what you were looking for, but I would say sure, give it a try.